My name is Amelia Chen-Wright. I'm 28 years old, and 18 months ago, my mother-in-law stood up at my wedding reception with a champagne glass in one hand, a microphone in the other, and asked 150 guests to publicly question whether my unborn child belonged to her son. That moment changed everything, but not in the way she planned. You see, Margaret Wright thought she was about to humiliate me so badly that I would disappear from her precious family forever. She thought she was protecting her bloodline from someone she called a gold-digging nurse from Worcester, who probably doesn't even know who the father is. She was wrong about me. She was wrong about my baby. And as it turns out, she was catastrophically wrong about her own son. What happened in the 3 weeks between that wedding reception and the day the DNA results came back didn't just destroy Margaret's reputation. It unraveled a family secret that had been buried for 3 generations. It exposed a lie that Margaret herself had been telling for 30 years. And it taught me something I never expected to learn. Sometimes the people who accuse you of not belonging are the ones who are most afraid that they don't belong either. If you've ever been made to feel like an outsider in your own family, stay with me, because this story isn't really about DNA. It's about what happens when you finally stop begging people to love you and start demanding the truth. Let me start at the beginning. Not the wedding, that was just the explosion. The bomb had been ticking for 2.5 years, ever since I met James Wright at a coffee shop in Cambridge. I was coming off a double shift at Boston Children's Hospital. I was a pediatric nurse practitioner, which is a fancy way of saying I spent 16 hours holding the hands of sick children and translating medical jargon for parents who were terrified out of their minds. I was exhausted. I was covered in what I desperately hoped was apple juice, and I was wearing scrubs with a cartoon dinosaur on them because it was pediatric oncology week and the kids thought the dinosaur was funny. James was in line ahead of me. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He had that polished effortless look that screamed old money. Not new money that tries too hard, but old money that doesn't have to try at all. He ordered some complicated oat milk thing with 3 modifiers. I ordered black coffee because I was too tired to remember my own name, let alone a drink order. He turned around, didn't see me, and backed right into me. His entire latte, the complicated one, spilled down the front of my dinosaur scrubs. I burst into tears, not because of the coffee, because of the 16-hour shift, because of the 2-year-old who had died in my arms 3 days earlier, and whose face I still saw every time I closed my eyes, because I hadn't eaten in 14 hours, because my mother had been dead for 9 years, and I still sometimes picked up my phone to call her before remembering I couldn't. James was horrified. He kept apologizing, kept trying to wipe the coffee off my scrubs with a napkin, which was just smearing it around and making everything worse. And then he did something no one had done for me in a very long time. He looked at my face, really looked, and said, "You're not okay. When's the last time you ate?" I told him I didn't remember. He bought me a sandwich and a coffee, and he sat with me for an hour while I cried in a corner booth of that coffee shop, telling a complete stranger things I hadn't told anyone. About the little boy who died, about my mother, about how I'd been feeling like a ghost in my own life for years. James didn't run away. He listened, and at the end of the hour he said, "I'd really like to see you again. Not because I feel guilty about the coffee, because you're the most real person I've met in years." That was the thing about James. When we were alone, he was wonderful. He was kind. He was attentive. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt since my mother died. The problem was James was never just James. It was James Wright, and the Wrights were not a family. They were a dynasty. I didn't understand what I was walking into. I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants who worked 80 hours a week running a nail salon. My mother, Lien, was the heart of our family. She was the one who made sure I did my homework, who packed my lunches, who taught me to cook Vietnamese food, and told me stories about her childhood in Ho Chi Minh City. My father, Min, worked beside her, but he was quieter, more reserved. He showed love through action, working, providing, fixing things around the house, not through words or affection. When I was 19, my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She was gone 4 months later. My father remarried within a year. His new wife, Diane, was also Vietnamese, but she was different from my mother. Where my mother was warm, Diane was efficient. Where my mother was nurturing, Diane was distant. I don't think she was cruel. I think she just didn't know what to do with a grieving, angry teenager who reminded her husband of his dead wife. I left for college 6 months after the wedding. I paid my own way through nursing school with scholarships and loans and side jobs. By the time I met James, I had been taking care of myself for nearly a decade. I didn't need a man to save me. I didn't need his money. What I needed was someone who looked at me and saw a person, not a project. For the first few months, James gave me that. We dated quietly. He didn't introduce me to his family, and at first, I didn't push. I knew the Wrights were wealthy. Old Boston Brahmin money. The kind of family that had buildings named after them at Harvard and summer homes on Martha's Vineyard. I knew I wasn't what they had in mind for their only son, but James assured me that once they met me, they'd love me. He told me his mother was particular but had a good heart. He told me his father was traditional but fair. He told me his older sister Tori was protective but warm. Every single one of those statements was a lie. I met Margaret Wright for the first time 6 months into our relationship. James had been avoiding it, making excuses, pushing the date back. Finally, I told him that if he was serious about me, he needed to stop hiding me. He agreed to bring me to Sunday dinner at the family estate in Chestnut Hill. The estate was ridiculous. I don't mean that as an exaggeration. It was a 12,000 square foot Georgian revival mansion on 6 acres of land that had been in the Wright family since 1892. There was a gate. There was a circular driveway. There was a housekeeper who opened the door and took my coat like I was entering a hotel. Margaret was waiting in the living room. She was 62 years old, silver blonde haircut in a sharp bob, wearing a cashmere sweater set and pearls that probably cost more than my car. She looked me up and down, head to toe, slow and deliberate, and then she smiled. Not a warm smile. A smile that said, "I've already decided I don't like you. But I'm going to be civil so my son can't accuse me of being rude." Michelle, she said, pronouncing it like the airline Amelia instead of Amelia. What an unexpected name. My mother named me, I said. It means industrious in Latin. How lovely, Margaret said, already looking past me at the door. And what do you do, Amelia? James has been so vague about your work. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner at Boston Children's, I said. Margaret's smile tightened. A nurse. How noble. That was the moment I understood. It wasn't that I was Vietnamese, though that certainly didn't help. It wasn't that I was from Worcester, though that also didn't help. It was that I was working class. I had a job that required actual labor. I wasn't from a family that had summered anywhere. I hadn't gone to private school or debutante balls, or any of the other rituals Margaret believed separated civilized people from the masses. To Margaret Wright, I was not just beneath her son. I was beneath her notice entirely. Dinner was excruciating. Margaret asked me questions designed to highlight my inadequacy. Where did I go to school? University of Massachusetts, Boston, not Harvard. What did my father do? Owns a nail salon in Worcester. He doesn't manage investments. Had I ever been to Europe? No, I could afford it. James's father, Richard, barely spoke. He nodded along, ate his dinner, and retreated to his study the moment the plates were cleared. His sister Tori asked one question. "So you're the nurse," and then spent the rest of the meal on her phone. When we left, James was quiet in the car. Finally, he said, "That went better than I expected." I looked at him. "James, your mother called me exotic 3 times. That's not a compliment. She's just old-fashioned," he said. "Give her time. 14 more months of time." And it only got worse. The engagement happened on a beach in Cape Cod, just the 2 of us, with the sun setting over the water. James got down on one knee, pulled out a ring that was beautiful and simple, exactly what I would have chosen, and asked me to marry him. I said yes. I said yes because I loved him, despite his family, despite his unwillingness to stand up to them, despite every red flag that was already waving in my peripheral vision. I said yes because when it was just us, he was the man I wanted to spend my life with. The next morning, I made a mistake. I called Margaret to share our news before James could warn me not to. There was a long silence on the line. Then Margaret said, "I see. Well, I suppose we'll need to discuss logistics. James, put your mother on the phone." James took the phone. I couldn't hear her words, but I watched his face fall. He went pale. His jaw tightened. He said, "Yes, mother, and I understand, and no, mother." And then he hung up and sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. "What did she say?" I asked. She said she's going to Europe for 6 months, James said. "She won't be involved in the wedding planning. She said she needs time to process. Like I was a disease she needed to recover from." Margaret left for France 2 weeks later. She didn't call me before she left. She didn't send a card or a note or any acknowledgement that her son had just gotten engaged. She just disappeared. James was relieved. He said it was better this way, that we could plan our wedding without her interference. He said she'd come around eventually. He said she just needed to get used to the idea. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But 6 weeks after she left, I found out I was pregnant. I was 10 weeks along when I took the test. I had been feeling sick every morning for 2 weeks, but I thought it was stress. The wedding planning was overwhelming. Work was exhausting. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was carrying the quiet, constant grief of knowing that my mother would never see me get married. When that second line appeared on the pregnancy test, I felt 2 things at once: overwhelming joy and absolute terror. Joy because I had always wanted to be a mother, but terror because I knew exactly what Margaret would say. I told James that night. He was happy, genuinely happy for about 30 seconds. Then his face changed. "We can't tell my mother," he said. "Not yet. Not until after the wedding." "Why not?" I asked. "Because she'll think." He trailed off. "She'll think what, James?" "She'll think we're rushing because you're pregnant. She'll think you trapped me." The word trap hit me like a slap. "I didn't trap you. We're engaged. We were getting married anyway." "I know that. You know that. But my mother doesn't think like a normal person. She looks for the worst in everyone. If we tell her now, she'll use it against you forever." So I agreed. I agreed to hide my pregnancy. I agreed to wear loose-fitting dresses at dress fittings. I agreed to lie to everyone. My father, my coworkers, my own body. To avoid giving Margaret ammunition. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was thinking that hiding the truth would protect me. The truth always comes out. And when it does, it comes out in the worst possible way. The wedding was planned for 6 months later, when I would be 6 months pregnant. I was already showing by then, not obviously, not to strangers, but to anyone who knew me. The bump was there. I wore an A-line dress with an empire waist that disguised it. I told people I'd gained a little weight from stress. Margaret came back from Europe 2 weeks before the wedding. She didn't ask about the pregnancy because she didn't know about it. 4. James had managed to keep it from her completely, which should have been my first clue that he was better at hiding things than I wanted to admit. The week before the wedding, Margaret insisted on hosting a rehearsal dinner at the estate. It was a small event, just family and the wedding party. Margaret spent the entire evening making passive-aggressive comments about everything from my choice of flowers, too common to my dress, too simple to my father's toast, too long and too emotional. My father, to his credit, ignored her completely. He was there for me. He was trying. After years of distance, he was making an effort. Diane, my stepmother, sat in the corner and said nothing. As usual, the night before the wedding, James came to my apartment. He was nervous, fidgety, unable to sit still. I asked him what was wrong. My mother knows, he said. Knows what? About the baby. Tori told her. She's not happy. What does that mean, she's not happy? James wouldn't look at me. She said some things. For accusations. I told her they weren't true. He finally met my eyes. She said she wants a DNA test after the wedding. She wants to prove the baby is mine. I stared at him. She wants to prove, James, there's no question, the baby is yours. We've been together for 2 years. You know that, I know that. But she won't drop it. She says if I don't agree to the test, she'll make a scene at the wedding. Then we cancel the wedding, I said. We can't. Everything's paid for. Everyone's already here. I don't care about the money, James. I care about not being accused of cheating on my wedding day. She's not going to say anything at the wedding, James said. I talked to her. She agreed to wait until after. I should have known he was lying. I should have known that Margaret Wright had never agreed to wait for anything in her life. But I was exhausted. I was pregnant. I was 48 hours away from marrying the man I loved. I wanted to believe him, so I did. And that was my third mistake. The wedding day started beautifully. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze that made the flowers sway. I got ready at a hotel near the venue with my 2 coworkers from the hospital, the only friends I had who could afford to take time off. My father came to see me before the ceremony. He cried when he saw me in my dress. Diane took a photo that I later deleted because I looked like I was already bracing for impact. The ceremony was lovely. James cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. His voice broke when he said his vows. For 20 minutes I forgot about Margaret. I forgot about the DNA test. I forgot about everything except the fact that I was marrying a man who in that moment looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Then the reception started. The first hour was fine. We did the first dance. We cut the cake. Margaret stood in the corner with a tight smile and a champagne glass, watching but not participating. I started to relax. Maybe James had been telling the truth. Or maybe she had agreed to wait. Then the toast began. James's best man, a college friend named Bradley who had never liked me, gave a speech that was mostly inside jokes and mild insults. Tori gave a speech that was so cold I'm still not sure why she bothered. 4. My father gave a beautiful speech about my mother, about how proud she would have been, about how love was worth fighting for. And then Margaret stood up. She walked to the band leader and took the microphone. I watched her cross the dance floor, and something in my stomach went cold. Not the baby. The baby was fine. It was fear. Pure, animal fear. Before I welcome anyone into this family, Margaret said, her voice echoing through the reception hall, I think there's something we need to address. The room went silent. 150 guests, forks frozen midair, all looking at Margaret. My son and his bride are expecting a child. Margaret continued, and while that should be a joyful occasion, I believe in honesty. I believe in certainty. And so, before I can fully embrace Amelia as a member of this family, I need to be sure. I'm requesting a DNA test to confirm that this baby is actually my son's. Actual gas. I heard my father say something in Vietnamese that I won't translate here. My coworkers looked like they'd been slapped. And James? James sat there. His hands were in his lap. His face was white. And he said nothing. The man I had just married. The man who had promised to love and cherish me. The man who had stood at an altar 2 hours earlier and vowed to protect me. He sat frozen in his chair while his mother accused me of infidelity in front of every person who mattered. I stood up. I didn't plan it. My body moved before my brain caught up. I walked to the stage. I took the microphone from Margaret. I looked at her face, smug, triumphant, certain she had won. And then I looked at James. If you want a DNA test, I said, my voice steady even though my hands were shaking, you'll get one. But you'll never undo this moment. You'll never take back what you just did, and you'll never ever make me feel ashamed of my child. I handed the microphone back to Margaret. I walked off the stage. I walked past James, who reached for my arm and missed. I walked past my father, who was already standing up to follow me. I walked out of the reception hall, down a long hallway, and into a bathroom where I locked myself in a stall, and finally let myself cry. 20 minutes later, my father knocked on the door. He's not coming, he said quietly. He's still in there, with her. 45 minutes later, James texted me. I'm sorry, I froze. I'll fix this. I love you. I didn't respond. If you think you know what's coming next, comment your prediction. 4. Because what happened in the 3 weeks after that wedding reception, the 3 weeks I spent alone in our apartment while James moved back to his parents' house, changed everything I thought I knew about my family, his family, and the meaning of the word belonging. Or took their DNA test. I had nothing to hide, but I also took my own. And what I found in my own bloodline was a secret Margaret Wright never saw coming. The drive from the reception venue to our apartment in Back Bay took 22 minutes. Because I counted every second. My father drove. Diane sat in the back seat, unusually quiet. Neither of them knew what to say, and honestly neither did I. I had just married the man I loved, and I had just left my own wedding reception alone. My father parked the car and walked me to the door. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, more lines around his eyes. For a moment I saw my mother in his face, the same worried crease between the eyebrows, the same tightness around the mouth. I can stay, he said. I'll sleep on fine, Dad. You're not fine. No, I admitted. But I will be. He hugged me. It was awkward. We weren't a hugging family, but I held on longer than I meant to. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. Your mother would have killed that woman, said. And then, for the first time in 9 years, I laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one, because he was right. My mother, who had survived war and immigration and poverty, who had built a business from nothing while raising a daughter and learning a new language. My mother would have taken Margaret Wright apart with her bare hands. Call me tomorrow, my father said. I will. He left. I walked into the apartment and sat on the floor of the nursery, the room we had painted pale yellow, the room with the crib still in boxes, the room where I had imagined rocking my baby to sleep, while James read aloud from whatever book he was obsessed with that week. I sat on that floor for a long time, and then I got angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, the kind that makes you scream and break things, the cold, quiet kind, the kind that settles into your bones and tells you, no one is going to fix this for you, so you'd better fix it yourself. The next morning, James called 6 times between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. I didn't answer any of them. Then he started texting, I'm so sorry. I was in shock. She caught me off guard. Please talk to me. I love you. The baby is mine, and I know it. I'll do whatever you want. At 8:15, I texted back one sentence. Come get your things. I need space. He showed up at 9 a.m. with his mother's car and driver. That told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't driven himself. He had asked Margaret's driver to bring him, for he was still in her orbit. He was still under her control. James looked terrible. His eyes were red. His shirt was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. When he walked through the door, he reached for me like a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. I stepped back. Don't, I said. Amelia, please. I said don't. He stopped. His hand fell to his side. He looked around the apartment, at the wedding photos still stacked on the dining table, at my suitcase half packed by the bedroom door, at the nursery with its unfinished crib. Are you leaving me? He asked. I don't know yet, I said. But I can't look at you right now. I can't be in the same room with someone who watched his mother call me a liar in front of everyone we know and didn't say a single word. I froze, he said. I told you. I froze. You're a 30-year-old man, James. You're not a child. Your mother has been bullying people your whole life, and you've never once stood up to her. That's not freezing. That's a pattern. He flinched like I'd hit him. Get your things, I said, or I'll text you when I'm ready to talk about the DNA test. What DNA test? He asked. There's nothing to test. The baby is mine. Your mother wants proof, so she'll get proof. And when it proves what we already know, she'll have nothing left to hold over us. You don't have to do this. Yes, I said. I do. Because if I don't, she'll spend the rest of my life questioning everything. Every decision I make, every word that comes out of my child's mouth, every breath I take in her presence. I'm not giving her that power. I'm going to take her test. I'm going to pass it, and then I'm going to shove the results in her face and walk away. James stared at me. You've changed, he said. No, I said. I've just stopped pretending. He left with his clothes and his laptop and a duffel bag full of things I didn't even remember we owned. The apartment felt different without him. Quieter, emptier, but also somehow mine. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had given away until I was alone with what was left. I went to work that day. I shouldn't have. I was still in my wedding makeup. I hadn't slept, but I had patience. Kids who were fighting for their lives, or parents who would have sold their souls for one more day with their children. And I couldn't abandon them because my mother-in-law was a monster. My coworker and friend Sarah pulled me into the break room the moment I walked in. What happened? She asked. We saw you leave. We heard what she said. Is it true about the DNA test? It's true, I said. And Amelia, that's insane. You don't have to prove anything to that woman. I know I don't have to, but I'm going to anyway. Because if I refuse, she wins. She gets to say I was hiding something. She gets to spend the rest of her life implying that my child isn't a right. I'm not letting her near my baby with that kind of ammunition. Sarah shook her head. You're stronger than me. I would have thrown my champagne glass at her head. I thought about it. We laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that comes from exhaustion, not humor. Sarah hugged me and told me to take the day off. I refused. I had a 4-year-old leukemia patient who was finally in remission, and I wasn't going to miss her discharge because of Margaret Wright. That night, I came home to an empty apartment and a voicemail from Margaret. Amelia, it's Margaret. I want you to know that my offer of a DNA test isn't personal. It's simply practical. The Wright family has a reputation to protect. I'm sure you understand. I've had my attorneys draw up an agreement. If the child isn't James's, you'll relinquish any claim to Wright assets. It's just common sense. Call me when you're ready to proceed. The child, not my grandchild, not our baby. The child. I saved the voicemail. I didn't know why yet, but something told me I might need it. The next 2 weeks were a blur of exhaustion, indignity, and quiet rage. Margaret's attorneys sent me a 14-page document outlining the terms of the DNA test. It specified which lab would be used, which chain of custody would be followed, and what would happen if in their words. The child is determined not to be biologically related to James Wright III. I signed it. I had nothing to hide. James came by twice during those weeks. The first time he brought flowers and an apology that felt rehearsed. The second time he brought news. Margaret wanted him to move back into the family estate temporarily while we sorted things out. She says it's not healthy for me to be alone, he said. She wants you where she can control you, I said. Can you blame her? I'm a mess. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't focus at work. Then get therapy, James. Don't move back in with your mother. She's 62. She's not going to change and you're 30. You could. He didn't answer that. He moved back into the estate the next day. But I stopped waiting for him to fight for me. I started fighting for myself. At first it was small things. I repainted the nursery. Not yellow, but a deep palming blue. I bought a rocking chair from a thrift store and spent a weekend sanding and refinishing it by hand. I cooked Vietnamese food. My mother's recipes, the ones I hadn't made since she died, and ate them alone at the kitchen table, crying and laughing at the same time because the flavors tasted like home. I went to my prenatal appointments alone. I felt the baby kick for the first time alone. I lay in bed at night with my hands on my belly and talked to the tiny person inside me, telling her I didn't know it was a her yet, that we were going to be okay, that we didn't need the right, that we had each other. But I was also doing something else, something I didn't tell anyone about. I ordered a DNA test, not the one Margaret wanted, the paternity test that would prove what I already knew. A different one, an ancestry test, for I had always been curious about my father's side of the family. My mother's family was well documented. Her parents had fled Vietnam after the fall of Saigon, and she had kept meticulous records of her lineage. But my father's mother, my grandmother, who had died before I was born, was a mystery. My father never talked about her. When I asked, he changed the subject. Now, lying alone in my apartment with nothing but time and silence, I decided to find out why. I swabbed my cheek, sealed the sample, and mailed it off. The results would take 2 to 3 weeks. I didn't expect to find anything important. I just wanted to know where I came from. I wanted something to hold on to. Some sense of identity that wasn't wrapped up in James or Margaret or the baby or the wedding or any of the chaos that had become my life. I had no idea that I was about to uncover a secret that had been buried for 3 generations. 9 days after the wedding, I went to the lab for the paternity test. Margaret insisted on being there. She sat in the waiting room in a cream-colored Chanel suit, reading a magazine, not looking at me. As if I were a stranger she happened to be sharing space with. James was there too. He held my hand while the technician drew my blood. He told me he loved me. He told me everything would be fine. I wanted to believe him, but I had stopped believing him the moment he let his mother take that microphone. The technician also took a cheek swab from James and a blood sample from me for the fetal DNA analysis. Non-invasive prenatal paternity testing, that's what they called it. They could determine paternity as early as 7 weeks. I was 27 weeks. The results would be definitive. 2 weeks, the technician said, maybe less. Margaret stood up. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since the wedding. I hope you understand, she said, that this isn't personal. It's entirely personal, I said. You just don't want to admit it. She smiled, that tight, frozen smile, and walked out. James drove me home. We sat in the car in front of my apartment for 20 minutes, not talking, not touching, just existing in the same space. I miss you, he finally said. I miss who I thought you were, I said. I got out of the car and didn't look back. 5 days later, my ancestry results came back. I was sitting in the rocking chair in the nursery, eating pho from the Vietnamese place down the street, when the email arrived. Your DNA results are ready. I opened the app on my phone. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe some Vietnamese regional breakdown. Maybe a surprise connection to a distant cousin. Something boring and predictable. What I saw made me drop my chopsticks. 47% Vietnamese. 48% European, primarily British and Irish. 5% Ashkenazi Jewish. I stared at the screen. I read it again, and again. This was impossible. Both my parents were Vietnamese. Both sets of grandparents were Vietnamese. I had grown up eating Vietnamese food, or speaking Vietnamese at home, celebrating Tet and burning incense for ancestor I had never met, but whose names I knew by heart. 48% European meant one of my parents was nearly half white, and since my mother's family was well documented and entirely Vietnamese, that meant. I called my father. He didn't answer. I called again and again, 7 times. On the 8th try, he picked up. Amelia, what's wrong? Dad, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Silence. Dad, your grandmother, he said slowly, was not my biological mother. I felt the room tilt. What? I found out when I was 15. My parents, the people I called mom and dad, they adopted me. I never told anyone, not even your mother. Why not? Because I was ashamed. Or because I didn't want to be different. Because in our community, family is everything, and I didn't want people to think I didn't belong. Who are your biological parents? Another long silence. Then, I don't know. My adoptive parents never told me. They said it was better that way. They said the past should stay in the past. Dad, I need you to think. Did they give you any papers, any records, anything at all? There was a name on the adoption certificate. I saw it once. When when I was cleaning out their house after they died. I don't remember it. You don't remember your own biological mother's name. I was 35 years old, Amelia. I had a wife and a daughter. I didn't want to know. I threw the papers away. I closed my eyes. Dad, you threw away the only record of where we come from. I didn't think it mattered. It matters now. Why? What's going on? Did you find something? I didn't tell him about the right. I didn't tell him about the European DNA or the Jewish markers or any of it. I just said, I'm trying to understand who I am, and I need your help. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, there was one other thing. My adoptive mother, your grandmother, she told me once that my biological mother was very young, a teenager, and the father was someone her family worked for. A foreigner. British, I think British. My blood went cold. Dad, I'll call you back. I hung up. I opened my laptop, and I started searching. Here's what I found over the next 72 hours. The British had a significant presence in Vietnam during the post-World War II era, before the French returned and long before the Americans arrived. British diplomats, military advisors, and businessmen lived in Saigon and Hanoi throughout the 1940s and 1950s. One of those British diplomats was named Sir Harold Wright. He served in Saigon from 1948 to 1954. He was married. His wife remained in London, but he was known to have had relationships with local women. Multiple relationships, multiple children. Harold Wright had 2 legitimate sons. One stayed in England and became a barrister. The other, Henry Wright, moved to Boston in 1960 and built the Wright family fortune in real estate and private equity. Henry Wright was Margaret's husband Richard's father. Harold Wright was James's great-grandfather, which meant that if my biological grandmother, my father's biological mother, was the daughter of Harold Wright and a Vietnamese woman, then I was descended from the same British diplomat who started the Wright family. I was related to James. Distantly, yes. Remotely, yes, but related. And Margaret Wright, the woman who demanded a DNA test to prove I was worthy of her family, had married into a family whose founder had done exactly what she was accusing me of. He had fathered children outside of marriage. He had mixed bloodlines. He had done everything Margaret claimed to despise, but that wasn't the biggest discovery. Not even close, because while I was searching for Harold Wright's records, I found something else. A family tree that someone had posted on a genealogy website. It included Henry Wright, his wife, their children, Richard and his 2 sisters, and Richard's children, Tori and James. I looked at James's entry, date of birth, place of birth, parents, Richard Wright and Margaret Wright, and then I saw the note. Someone had attached a medical annotation to James's profile, a genetic marker, a note that said, possible non-paternity event, DNA markers inconsistent with right paternal line non-paternity event. That was the polite term for the father isn't the father. I stared at the screen. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I thought about James's face, his coloring, his bone structure. He looked nothing like Richard. Everyone had always said he looked like Margaret. Same sharp chin, same cool blue eyes, but no one had ever questioned why he didn't look like his father. I thought about Margaret's obsession with bloodlines, her insistence on purity, her cruelty toward anyone she considered an outsider. And I thought about what it would mean if James wasn't a biological right. If the family heir, the golden child, the son she had protected and coddled and molded in her image, wasn't even her husband's child. I needed proof. I got it 3 days later. The paternity test results came back on a Tuesday morning. The email arrived at 8:47 a.m. Your results are available. I opened it with shaking hands. The baby's father, James Wright III. Probability of paternity, 99.997%. I wasn't surprised. I had never doubted it for a second. But seeing it in writing, seeing the scientific proof that Margaret's accusation was a lie, made me cry. Not sad tears, angry tears, relief tears. All the tears I hadn't let myself cry for 3 weeks. I printed the result. I put them in an envelope. And then I did something Margaret didn't expect. I also ran a full genetic profile on James. I had kept his hairbrush, not because I was sentimental, because I had a feeling I might need his DNA for something more than paternity. I had collected several strands of hair with intact roots and sent them to a different lab, one that specialized in forensic genetic genealogy. The result came back an hour after the paternity test. James was not a biological Wright. His Y chromosome markers did not match Richard Wright's known genetic profile. His DNA showed ancestry that was consistent with Margaret's family, English, German, Scandinavian, but nothing from Richard's line. No Irish, no French, no markers that would indicate a connection to the Wright paternal line. I called the lab. Are you certain? The geneticist was careful. Based on the samples provided, the probability that James Wright III is biologically related to Richard Wright is less than 0.001%. The markers are consistent with a different paternal lineage entirely. Could there be a mistake? We ran the analysis twice. Same result both times. I hung up. I sat in the nursery, the blue nursery, the one I had painted myself, and held my belly and tried to process what I had just learned. Margaret Wright had accused me of infidelity. She had humiliated me in front of 150 people. She had demanded proof that my child belonged to her son, and her son wasn't even her husband's child. The woman who had built her entire identity around blood purity, around legacy, around the sanctity of the Wright name. She had been living a lie for 30 years. She had passed off another man's child as her husband's heir. She had let Richard raise a son who wasn't his. his. She had let James believe he was a right when he wasn't. I didn't know who James's biological father was. I didn't care. What mattered was that Margaret had committed the exact sin she had accused me of, and she had covered it up for 3 decades. I picked up my phone. I didn't call James. He would have panicked. He would have confronted his mother, and she would have lied and the whole thing would have become a mess of accusations and denials. I didn't call Margaret. She would have destroyed the evidence. She would have lawyered up. She would have done everything in her power to bury the truth. Instead, I called Grandpa Theodore. Theodore Wright was 84 years old. He was Richard's father, James's grandfather. He had built the Wright family empire from the ground up, starting with a single real estate investment in 1965 and ending with a portfolio worth nearly $500 million. He was also estranged from Margaret. They had never gotten along. He thought she was a social climber with delusions of grandeur. She thought he was an old man who refused to step aside. They had barely spoken in a decade, but Theodore had always been kind to me. At family gatherings, the few I had attended, he was the only one who asked me real questions, not about my background or my job or my family, about me, about what I thought, about what I wanted. When I called him, he answered on the second ring. Amelia, I've been waiting for your call. You knew. I've known about James since he was a child. I hired a private investigator when he was 5 years old. He looked nothing like Richard. Nothing. I had to know. And Margaret had an affair, a college boyfriend. She got pregnant, passed the child off as Richard's, and never told anyone. Richard knows, or at least he suspected, but he never confronted her. He was too afraid of losing her family's money. Her family's money. The Wrights weren't always wealthy, Amelia. When I started out, I had nothing. Margaret's father was the one who invested in my company. Without him, there would be no Wright empire. Richard knows that. He also knows that if he divorces Margaret, her family will pull their money. So he stayed. He kept his mouth shut, and he raised another man's son. I sat down. The room was spinning. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only one who can do something about it. You have the paternity results for your baby. You have James's genetic profile. You have proof. I have documentation. The investigator's report, the bank records, everything. Together, we can expose the truth. What truth? The truth that Margaret Wright has been lying for 30 years. The truth that she accused you of the very thing she did herself. The truth that the Wright family, this family she claims to protect, has been built on a foundation of fraud and deceit. And what happens after that? Theodore laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. Then we finally get to see what happens when a woman who built her life on being better than everyone else gets knocked off her pedestal. Don't you want to watch? I looked down at my belly, at the blue nursery, at the life I was building for myself and my child. Yes, I said. I really, really do. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were better than you know what I felt in that moment. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't hatred. It was something simpler and more powerful. It was the truth. And the truth was about to set a lot of people free. The family meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon at the Wright estate. Grandpa Theodore insisted on hosting. He said it was time for full transparency, and that anyone who didn't attend would be removed from consideration for future inheritance. Margaret thought the meeting was about me. She thought Theodore had finally seen reason, and was going to demand that I take the DNA test, which I had already taken, though she didn't know that yet or face consequences. James thought the meeting was about reconciliation. He had been calling me every day, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to desperate to angry to sad. I hadn't responded to any of them. He didn't know what I had discovered. He didn't know that his entire identity was about to collapse. Tori, James's older sister, thought the meeting was about the business. She had been angling for a bigger role in the family company for years, and she assumed Theodore was finally going to give it to her. She had no idea that she was about to become the most powerful person in the room. And Richard? Richard knew. I could see it in his eyes when I arrived at the estate. He had been living with this secret for 30 years. He knew what was coming, and for the first time in his life, he looked almost relieved. I arrived early. I wore a simple black dress, maternity, because I was now almost 8 months pregnant, and my mother's gold hoop. No makeup except mascara. My hair was pulled back in a low bun. I looked like a woman who had nothing to prove and nothing to lose. Theodore met me at the door. He was frail, thinner than the last time I'd seen him, leaning on a cane, but his eyes were sharp. He took my hands in his and held them for a long moment. Are you ready? He asked. I've been ready since she took that microphone, I said. Good, because today we burn it all down. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had waited decades for revenge and was finally going to get it. The family gathered in the library at 2 p.m. It was a huge room, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace big enough to stand in, leather chairs arranged in a circle like we were about to have group therapy instead of the public execution I was planning. Margaret sat in the largest chair, the one closest to the fireplace. She was wearing a navy blue dress and her signature pearls. Her silver blonde hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like a woman who expected to receive an apology. James sat next to her. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes. His suit hung loose on his frame. When he saw me walk in, he stood up. Amelia, sit down, James. He sat. Tori was on the leather sofa, scrolling through her phone. Her husband Charles sat beside her, looking bored. Tori glanced up at me, raised an eyebrow, and went back to her phone. She had no idea that her life was about to change. Richard stood by the window, looking out at the garden. He didn't turn around when I entered, or he didn't acknowledge anyone. He just stood there, his back to the room, waiting. Theodore took his place by the fireplace. He didn't sit in the leather chairs. He stood, leaning on his cane, commanding the room without saying a word. "Thank you all for coming," Theodore said. "I know this is an unusual gathering, but recent events have made it clear that this family has some unresolved issues that need to be addressed." Margaret smiled. "If this is about the DNA test, Theodore, I'm happy to." "It's not about the DNA test for Margaret. Or rather, it is, just not the one you think." Her smile faltered. Theodore nodded at me. I stood up. I walked to the center of the room, where everyone could see me, and I pulled 3 documents from my bag. The first document, the paternity test proving James was the father of my baby. The second document, my ancestry results, showing my connection to the Wright family through Harold Wright's illegitimate child. The third document, James's full genetic profile, proving he was not biologically related to Richard Wright. I set them on the table in front of Margaret. "I took your DNA test," I said. "As you can see from the first document, the baby is James's. 99.9997% probability. You were wrong. You've been wrong from the beginning." Margaret's face didn't change. She was good. I had to give her that. She didn't flinch. She didn't react. She just looked at the document like it was a coupon she had no intention of using. "Congratulations," she said flatly. "You passed the test. Now, can we move on?" "No," I said, "because I also took a second test, an ancestry test, and I discovered something you might find interesting." So I slid the second document toward her. "I am descended from Harold Wright," I said, "the British diplomat who served in Saigon. He had a child with a Vietnamese woman. That child was my great-grandmother, which means I am a blood relative of this family, distantly, but related nonetheless." For the first time, Margaret's mask slipped just a fraction, a tiny tightening around her eyes. "You're lying," she said. "I'm not. You can verify the records yourself. Harold Wright's illegitimate children have been documented by historians. The DNA evidence is conclusive." "So you're a bastard branch," Margaret said. "That doesn't make you family. That makes you a footnote, maybe," I said. "But here's the thing, Margaret. I didn't come here to claim my place in your family. I don't want your name. I don't want your money. I came here because I wanted you to understand something." "And what's that?" I picked up the third document. I held it so everyone could see it. Then I looked directly at James. "Your mother demanded a DNA test to prove my baby was yours," I said, "and I gave it to her. But I also ran a DNA test on you, James. And what I found changes everything." James stood up. "What are you talking about?" "James, sit down," Margaret snapped. "Don't," I said. "Don't tell him to sit down. Don't tell him to be quiet. Don't control him for one more second." Margaret's face went white. "Amelia, I am warning you." "James," I said, "you are not Richard's biological son." The room went silent. Not the kind of silence where people are thinking. The kind of silence where people are trying to breathe and can't. "What?" James whispered. Your DNA doesn't match the right paternal line," I said. "Your biological father is someone else. Someone your mother had an affair with 30 years ago." James turned to Margaret. "Is this true?" Margaret didn't answer. She looked at Theodore, at Richard, at the door, anywhere but at her son. "Is this true?" James shouted. "Yes," Richard said. Everyone turned. Richard had finally turned away from the window. His face was gray. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "It's true," he said again. "I've known since James was 5 years old." "You knew?" James's voice cracked. "You knew I wasn't yours, and you never told me." "I was protecting the family," Richard said. "Your mother's family had money. Without them, the Wrights would have lost everything. So I kept my mouth shut. I raised you, I loved you. But I knew, you're not my father. I'm your father in every way that matters. Biology isn't." "Don't," James said. "Don't you dare. You lied to me for 30 years. You let me believe I was a Wright. You let me build my entire identity around a name that isn't even mine." He turned back to Margaret. "Who is he? Who's my biological father?" Margaret's composure finally broke. Her chin trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears, angry tears. "His name was Charles Beaumont," she said. "We were together in college, before I married Richard. He was everything Richard wasn't, but his family had no money. My parents wouldn't allow it, so I married Richard. And when I found out I was pregnant, I told Richard the baby was his. He believed me, or he pretended to believe me. I never knew which." "You lied to me," James said. "You lied. I protected you. You humiliated my wife in front of everyone we know. You accused her of cheating. You demanded proof that her baby was mine. And all along, you were the one who—" "I did what I had to do." "No," James said. "You did what was easy. You lied because the truth was inconvenient. You threw Amelia under the bus because you couldn't face your own reflection." He walked to the door. Then he stopped. He turned to me. "Did you know?" he asked. "I found out 3 days ago," I said. "I didn't tell you because I knew you would confront her alone. And I knew she would lie. I needed witnesses. I needed proof. I needed you to hear the truth from her mouth, not from mine." James looked at me for a long moment. I couldn't read his expression. I still can't, even now. But I saw something shift in his eyes. Something break, something heal. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." Then he walked out the door. Margaret tried to regain control. She was good at that. Regrouping, reframing, rewriting history to make herself the victim. "This doesn't change anything," she said. James is still my son. He's still Richard's heir. The family name is still—" "Sit down, Margaret," Theodore said. She sat. Theodore walked to the center of the room. He was slow, deliberate, every step an effort, but his voice was strong. I've known about James since he was 5 years old, Theodore said. I hired a private investigator. I had proof. I could have exposed you 30 years ago, but I didn't. Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid of what would happen to the family. Because I thought money mattered more than the truth. He looked at me. Amelia taught me otherwise. She walked into this family knowing we looked down on her. She took your abuse, Margaret, and she didn't break. She didn't become bitter. She didn't become cruel. She became stronger. She became smarter. And when you pushed her too far, she didn't run. She stayed. She fought, and she won. He turned to Richard. You should have left her 30 years ago, he said. You should have chosen honesty over comfort, but you didn't. And now your son hates you. Your wife is a liar. Your family is a fraud. Richard said nothing. Theodore turned to Tori. You're the only true right left. Congratulations. You just became the most important person in this room. Tori looked up from her phone. For the first time, she was paying attention. What does that mean? It means the will I'm filing next week names you as the primary heir to the Wright estate. Not James. Not Margaret. You. Margaret stood up. You can't do that. I can, Theodore said. And I am. The right name. The right name is worth nothing if it's built on lies. I'm done protecting you, Margaret. I'm done protecting anyone. From now on, this family runs on the truth. And the truth is, you're not the person you pretended to be. Margaret looked around the room. At me. At Theodore. At Richard. At Tori. And for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. You'll regret this, she said. I already regret not doing it sooner, Theodore said. I found James in the garden behind the estate. He was sitting on a stone bench, staring at the fountain, not moving. I sat down next to him. We didn't speak for a long time. I don't know who I am anymore, he finally said. Yes, you do, I said. You're James. You're the man who spills lattes on strangers and then buys them sandwiches. You're the man who cries at weddings. You're the man who tries even when trying isn't enough. What if that's not enough either? Then you try harder, or you try differently. Or you accept that some things can't be fixed and you focus on the things that can. He looked at me. Do you still love me? I took a long time to answer. Not because I didn't know. Because I needed him to hear the truth. For I love the person you are when you're not afraid, I said. I love the person you could be if you stopped letting your mother control you. I don't love the person who sat in silence while she destroyed me. And I won't love that person ever again. I want to be different, he said. Then be different. Don't tell me. Show me. He nodded. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. Where do we go from here? He asked. To therapy, I said. Individual and couples. To parenting classes. To a house that isn't paid for by your family's money. To a life where we make our own decisions and our own mistakes and our own future. What about my mother? What about her? She made her choices. Now she lives with them. She's going to fight the will. Let her. She'll lose. And even if she wins, it won't matter. Because I'm not raising our child in a family that values money over honesty. If the Wrights can't change, we'll leave. We'll build something new. Just us. James was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't deserve you. No, I said. You don't, but maybe someday you will. 6 weeks later, I gave birth to a baby girl. We named her Lily. Not after anyone in either family. Just a name we loved. A fresh start. A clean slate. James was in the delivery room. He held my hand. He cut the cord. He cried when they put her in his arms, ugly, heaving sobs that shook his whole body. I'm going to be better for her, he said. I promise. I wanted to believe him. I still want to believe him, but I'm not naive anymore. Love isn't enough. Promises aren't enough. What matters is what you do when no one is watching. What matters is who you become when the pressure is off. James is in therapy. So am I. We're in couples counseling. We're learning how to fight fair, how to be honest, or how to hold each other accountable without destroying each other. It's hard. Some days, I'm not sure we'll make it. Some days I look at him and see the man who sat silent while his mother destroyed me. And some days, I look at him and see the man who held my hand while I pushed his daughter into the world. I don't know how our story ends, but I know how this chapter ends. Margaret lives in Florida now. Naples, a condo she bought with the last of her separate assets. Richard divorced her 3 months after the family meeting. The settlement was brutal. She got almost nothing. Her family's money is tied up in trusts she can't access without a surviving spouse. Richard made sure of that. She calls James every Sunday. He doesn't answer. She leaves voicemails that range from tearful apologies to furious accusations. He deletes them without listening. She hasn't met Lily. She won't, unless she can look me in the eye and apologize for what she did. Not because she got caught, but because she actually understands why it was wrong. I'm not holding my breath. Grandpa Theodore passed away 4 months after Lily was born. He held her once, in the hospital just hours after her birth. He looked at her tiny face and smiled. A real smile, but not the sharp one he used when he was scheming. She's going to change everything, he said. She's just a baby, I said. So were you once, he said. And look what you did. He died in his sleep 3 weeks later. His will was exactly what he promised. Tori got the bulk of the estate, but there was a trust for Lily. A small one. $50,000 to be used for her education. education. The rest of the family will fight it, the lawyer told me. Let them, I said. I'm not afraid of a fight anymore. Richard calls every month. He wants to see Lily. He wants to rebuild his relationship with James. He's trying. I'll give him that. He's gone to therapy. He's really apologized without excuses or justifications. James is working on forgiving him. It's slow. Some days it feels impossible. But they're trying. And me. I'm still at Boston Children's. I'm still a pediatric nurse practitioner. I still hold the hands of sick children and translate medical jargon for terrified parents. I still cry in the break room sometimes. I still miss my mother, but I'm different now. I'm not afraid of being not enough. I'm not afraid of being rejected. I'm not afraid of standing up and telling the truth, even when the truth is ugly. Because the truth is the only thing that saved me, not DNA, not family names, not money, not status. The truth that Margaret Wright was wrong about me. The truth that my baby belonged exactly where she was. The truth that the people who accused me of being an outsider were the ones who never belonged in the first place. Here's what I learned. Blood doesn't make a family. Truth does. Loyalty does. Courage does. For Margaret Wright spent 30 years policing who belonged in her family, all while hiding a secret that would have destroyed everything she built. She was so afraid of being exposed that she projected her fear onto everyone around her, especially me. But here's the thing about fear. It's contagious. It makes you do terrible things to people who don't deserve it. The only cure is honesty, not brutal honesty, the kind that uses truth as a weapon, but real honesty, the kind that says, I'm scared, I'm broken, or I'm not who you think I am. Help me. I wish Margaret had been brave enough to say those words. She wasn't. She isn't. Maybe she never will be, but I am. I'm Amelia Chen-Wright. I'm 28 years old. I'm a mother. I'm a nurse. I'm a woman who was told she didn't belong, and who proved, not through revenge, but through truth, that belonging was never theirs to give. My daughter will never know the version of me that apologized for existing. She'll never know the version of me that begged to be accepted. She'll only know the version of me that stood up, spoke the truth, and walked away. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong, like you're not enough, like you have to prove your worth to people who have already decided you're worthless, hear me. You don't need their approval. You don't need their DNA test. You don't need their family name. You just need the courage to be honest about who you are and what you deserve. And what you deserve is to be loved without conditions, to be accepted without proof, to be seen, really seen for the person you are, not the person they're afraid you might be. If Margaret Wright taught me anything, it's that the people who judge you the harshest are usually the ones hiding the darkest secret. They're not better than you. They're just better at pretending. So stop pretending. Stop shrinking, stop apologizing for taking up space. Tell the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because the truth won't just set you free. It'll set everyone around you free too, including the people who least deserve it. James is calling me from the living room. Lily is crying. She's hungry again. She has his eyes and my stubbornness and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. I have to go. But before I do, if you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you, let me know in the comments. If you've ever had to fight for your place in a family that didn't want you, share your story. And if you think you know what happened next with James, with Margaret, with the Wright family fortune, comment your prediction. Because believe it or not, this isn't where the story ends. It's just where I stopped being afraid to tell it. My name is Amelia, and I finally know who I am.